Greetings, Doctor. Today we'll be covering a few different topics. We'll get started with a few defensive tools that are available to you in Reclamation Algorithm. We'll cover the beginner layouts for people who are just getting started in an array and who don't know how to handle the raids. And then I'll cover the layouts that I personally use for array CC day pushing. Finally, there is a bonus section at the end if you are interested in sharing your own layouts without having to log into the game. There is a tool available right at the end. First off, before we talk about defense, for those who are not aware, there's a difficulty setting that is available from the main menu, where you have the choice between peaceful, standard, and challenge mode. The original mode that was available was solely challenge mode. It was the original difficulty. I do not personally recommend you to do peaceful mode, but if you have a newer account, don't hesitate to reduce the difficulty to standard mode. The rewards will not be affected whatsoever. Do note that this only applies on the main Reclamation Algorithm map. It will not work in feral and strange territories, because those are locked to challenge difficulty. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. Raids in array starts almost right from the start, as soon as day 3 as a matter of fact, so learning how to deal with them early is important. I will put a link in the description specifically to the wiki page for raids. If you actually go there, you can see the different raids that are available, and for some of them, what exactly are the conditions for them to spawn and the raid composition. That way, if you need some assistance, you can see exactly what is going to spawn and you know how to prepare better. Ironically, the very first line of defense that you have is the very thing you must not lose, which is the headquarters of Sandbank. Its appearance changes as you upgrade the HQ level, and it starts at whopping 50,000 HP and 400 defense. Unironically, you can actually use it to tank the enemy waves and just let your operators deal the damage, which is quite critical since early on, it's pretty unlikely that you will have the wood necessary to actually build range tiles for your range operators to support you in any way, shape or form. But even later on, the headquarters still remains a viable tanking tool. A maxed out HQ has over 170,000 HP and very high defense to boot, so there are some bosses that you may actually struggle to stop for various reasons, more of them later. So letting them well on your HQ while you actually DPS them down is actually a viable option, and is something I personally use to clear some of the raids the first time around. However, you will not always defend in your HQ. What is very common to do is to intercept existing raids on the map, but odds are the first time you attempted those, if you have already played Array 2, is that it looks something like this. You have effectively no DP to your name, you don't have time to generate anything, you try to deploy an operator in an emergency, realize that actually that's not enough, and you just scramble to try to get any block count out, and yeah, it's okay, it's GG, well played. You can quit the raid right away. Nice try. Those maps are everywhere. Okay, so how do we handle those kind of situations? The answer lies in the tools that are available to you. As you get started, you can build urban style barriers. These act the same as roadblocks from the main chapters. They can be used to redirect where the enemies are going to go, so making sure that all the enemies will be forced into a single passageway means you won't have to split your forces. The second being the range tiles, the battlements. If you have the opportunity, for both your headquarters and the 3 surrounding outposts, don't hesitate to place your fortifications beforehand, because anything that you place right now will not cost you any DP during the actual fight, since they will already be replaced. That is the first step to surviving. On top of this, there is another consideration which is going to be critical, and it is a reactive barrier. The main difference between the reactive and the urban style barrier is that it does not redirect the enemies. They will still try to go through. But it has several advantages. For one, it doesn't cost any stone, meaning you can just gather wood and you will still be able to spam a lot of these. Secondly, it has a bit more HP and no less than triple the defense. With 0 DP cost, it means that you can get some early block count, up to 3 per barrier, very early on, buying you the time necessary to actually set up a defense in the first place in maps which have very short distances between the incursion points and your blue box. Starting from headquarters level 2, you will unlock the fog machines. These are pretty standard and you probably already encountered them in IS. They function the exact same way in that they massively reduce the movement speed of enemy in a 3x3 area, including aerial enemies. Since they only cost 5 wood and just a little bit of DP at just 5, they are also, especially combined with ambushes, a very potent tool to stall entire raids at a time. It is so potent combined with ambushes that against melee-only raids, it is often enough to just eliminate the entirety of them without them having any chance to move, and you won't need any block in the first place. Well, talking of which, make sure to, if you don't have any ambushes built, I would definitely recommend you to at least grab Ethan. You might need like E2 and S2 at Mastery 3 and possibly his module, but the combination of the both of them will generally make a big difference if you struggle to prevent the enemies from moving toward your defenses. One important lesson that remains and is not applicable just to raids but also some boss fights you will encounter, especially the boss fights, is that you will probably fail and waste precious time trying to deal with some of the raids. And that's perfectly okay. There is a save system available, and the game will save you progress every 3 days. If there is an important fight coming up, don't hesitate to wait until the next save point and try it and reload if you failed. That way you get the opportunity to change things around and try again. This is especially important early on if you struggle, as you will have pretty limited resources and don't necessarily want to throw everything away. There is no shame in defeat, only in refusing to stand up again. To finish up this section about raids, let me talk a bit about the bosses. The bosses usually are pretty simple, but they have a core gimmick to their kit that you need to exploit if you want to make the raid as easy as possible. The Dauntless Linebreaker raid, for example, has no ranged enemy whatsoever. The enemies are very threatening in melee, but if you use Ethan and a fog machine, as we've seen before, you can just throw a bunch of arts damage and will be able to deal with most of them. In a lot of cases, the bosses are so tanky, sporting hundreds of thousands of HP and sometimes thousands of defense and very high resistance for almost all of them, that the easiest solution is usually to separate the boss from the rest of the raid, deal with the raid, and then deal with the boss afterward. With the Linebreaker, as we've seen, it's best to crowd control, slow down and bind and stun the raid, and bring a lot of arts damage to deal with enemies. The Alarific raid has an absolute ton of enemies at 243 total. It's best to separate the boss again, and you have to deal with a raid of only melee enemies, but the spicy thing is that you have Vein Guardians that reflect the damage to your operators. So can you do the same thing as a Dauntless Linebreaker, but can you also keep up with the healing? The Sail Raider is a very gimmicky raid in the sense that the raid itself is extremely weak, but the Sail Raider has only 150 defense. So it's all about being able to bring your marksman to the forefront. So a Cruise Alter, for example, your XYA, OG or Alter, is enough to bring the boss down repeatedly and prevent it from progressing. The Dustweaver has an aura that buffs the enemies, but you can simply separate the Dustweaver from the rest of the raid to prevent the buff from being applied. The Dustweaver will also hit the 3 allied units that you deploy to block him. But here's the thing, allied units does not mean just operators. So the easiest solution is just to bring a summoner and deploy 3 summons in front of the boss, and that is basically it. The boss will stop hitting your operators and you won't have to worry about any of your operators being permanently locked out of the fight. Also, the Dustweaver cannot eat your headquarters, so if you want to do that and let your HQ tank the damage, you can, because the boss doesn't eat that hard. In fact, none of the bosses eat particularly hard apart from the Linebreaker during phase 2, and that's basically all there is to them. There's also the Rainbringer, and for the Rainbringer, here's a little special. With the last DLC released, the Necrosis transmitter has been made available. What is so special about this raid is that you got some Dublin Firecasters, these guys, that throw fireballs, and these fireballs count as enemies. If you have a Necrosis transmitter, every time a fireball explodes, it will apply a lot of Necrosis to all of the enemies. So all you need to do is just get a Necrosis transmitter, block the boss, have one operator to deal with the spiders he summons, and you've won the raid. All you need is 2 operators. Maybe a third one to keep the blocker alive, but that's basically all there is. Finally, the Annihilator may be the most difficult for people to stop, but the easy solution is, again, either use the HQ and let the HQ do the tanking while you work on the damage, or you can use the walls to redirect the path of the Annihilator and combine it with massive slowdowns to slowly wear down the boss. Obviously, there are more bosses than that, but I just wanted to cover specifically the raid bosses since you are kind of on the time limit to actually deal with them. So taking the time to take a look at the raid and the boss abilities and stats does make a big difference in how to approach them and understanding how they function. And on to the map layouts. I did promise that we'd be going into the different map layouts available for the different players. So we'll start with the beginner versions. The version that is specific to Reclamation Algorithm Critical Contention, the one I'm currently using for my run, which is basically going to be relevant to 10 different people, is available in the second tab, but I'm going to check it out a bit later. First off, you have a reminder as to how to approach some of the raids. In particular, enemy killed during a raid will be dead the next time you fight a raid. So it is a perfectly viable strat to attack a raid, kills as many enemies as possible, and then try to finish off that raid on a later note, especially for the significantly bigger raids. So don't hesitate to do this. If you have trouble dealing with one specific raid, you can kill them throughout several different acts. It's not a problem, it's perfectly doable. Feel free to do it. A point regarding the beginner layouts is that these are balanced around really the minimal defense possible. Because urban wall barriers T1 use 2 stone each, and stone is only available after we reach the second region, the most dangerous raids are usually the ones at the very start. So the layouts will try to use as few walls as possible. For a small comparison between the layout that will be shown here and what it actually looks like in game, the capture on the right actually is what a map layout looks like in game, and this is using the editor. So just a few things. Some walls, some secret walls can be destroyed. In case you're not aware, it's this one right here. So if you see something like this, not this, but this specifically, I know it looks like the same, but you know that you can actually break those. These are bushes. The important point about bushes and why they are so important to layouts is that every time you get back into the stage, they will respawn. Some of the positioning appears to be fixed for some stages, but not for some others. That is to say, for some stages, the bushes will always spawn in the same position for a given player, but for some others, it's going to be a different one. And sometimes, even for the same player, you can get in and you might have like these 3 bushes at the top, and then you get back in and maybe you have just these 2 bushes. It's just an example. This is not what it is like for this map in particular. It's just what can happen. The issue with this is that if you have walls on top of them, they will just straight up be deleted. So as much as possible, avoid placing walls where there are possible bushes that can spawn. and the rest are just trees. There's also an icon for stone, but realistically, the only maps that you want to defend to any degree are those in the starting region, because all raids will be there specifically because they are targeting your HQ. I will not cover all the maps where you just go through once and place the defenses, deal with the raid, and then move on, because there's just not much point in trying to optimize those. The headquarters, I will actually cover it later because there are a lot of different setups, and as much as possible, I recommend you to not defend directly at the HQ using those walls, simply because you need a lot more walls just to achieve the same result that can be done in other stages with like just 2 or 3 walls. So trying to redirect all the enemies is a bit of a pain. We'll see the HQ in more detail at the end. We'll start with the 3 outpost. So this one is a setup that is pretty similar to what I had, just 2 walls. You have to consider that the enemies on this line will go down in a corner, and then it goes straight like this, and then up. And this one in the middle lane, and this one does the same. So by doing this, we ensure that all those just get to a single point. We just force them through a single few tiles, and it's much easier to defend, pretty basic. The same idea is going to be applied to wide open interception point. So here all the enemies will be funneled through this. The idea with this kind of maps, don't hesitate to like shift the walls a little bit. So for example, these 2 walls can be shifted to the left, or they can be shifted to the right, depending on what operators you have available, because depending on whether you have like a Pramanix or an Ifrit or maybe a Mulnar, it's like you're going to have slightly different positionings. It's more a way of saying, hey, these are going to work for basically any starter account. The big idea also behind these walls, I want to point this out. The basic urban barriers are very easy to destroy. So as much as possible, you want to keep them away from ranged attackers. When we'll go over the HQ, we'll see the higher tier walls, and we'll talk about the differences between them. But for the time being, consider that these are mostly to redirect enemies, and that is basically it. They are not here to prevent enemies that have range attack that can attack them from getting through, because they will not survive. They just aren't tanky enough for that. If we go down, Desolate Interception Point is a very spooky raid, but it turns out that with just 5 walls, it still stands stone, but with 5 walls you can just redirect all the different lanes to the top. There are 2 advantages to that. First off, all the enemies will be forced in a single line, and secondly, you avoid all the different debuff tiles, because all these tiles right here will debuff the defense of your operators. Again, it's designed in such a way as to make sure that the ranged enemies will avoid attacking those, but you can't avoid it entirely. If you are willing to invest more, you could like have a full barrier here. You can like add a barrier right on this position, and the ranged enemies at the bottom will be forced through this. The issue is, again, it only works as long as you don't have enemies that have too high of a range. So if you're doing with rocket launchers or the Celebrator, it's not going to work. You'll need higher tier walls for that. Jagged Jungle. So this one is one of the first few maps that you will encounter, which has a secret wall. So this one right at the bottom, you'll need to cut down the trees, or you can use some various splash areas. I'll put a video in the description of someone who has done various testing on this exact wall, and you can see for yourself what kind of operators can break walls without having to be next to them, because usually you can't target walls directly. You usually need an operator to be adjacent to them and facing those directly, otherwise they can't target them. For this map, nothing in particular. The incursion point right here, from my experience, does not spawn enemies during raids. So you may not even need this. I do specifically recall one time where it happened, but this might have been during Reclamation Algorithm 1, which is why I specifically have comments saying, hey, just have a wall at the ready in case this happens, but yeah, just force all the enemies through them. The enemies will have to run all the way, so don't forget to use the reactive barrier to buy a bit of time. The map is shorter than it looks, especially if you're dealing with some more rushy type enemies. Masters of the Forest, no major raids will go through there ever, so simply do not bother. There's not much else to be said about this. Shrubbery Galore is the most painful map to defend if you have raids that go through multiple lanes. So you have like 2 red boxes at the bottom with enemies going at the top. You have some here, and then you have more incursion points there that will get to the blue boxes at the bottom. Do not build walls because it's extremely difficult to defend them, and it's also very inconvenient. If really you wanted one, you could build like one right there, for example, or right here to force the enemies that are coming from these 2 lanes to like join together and get there. But generally speaking, I would recommend you to avoid intercepting any raid on Shrubbery Galore, with the sole exception of some raids that have like thieves in there and are stealing from your HQ, because in that case, they will all follow the same lane and you can just intercept them and you'll be fine. But yeah, in most situations, raids will be in these 2 separate lanes and it's just so much more costly to actually defend properly. Treasure in the Trees is a big one, and there are actually 2 different map layouts. There is another secret room in the middle, and you have 2 potential breakable walls. That is to say, for my particular breakthrough, for example, this wall cannot be broken. I could only break this one. So it's going to be different depending on people, and what you want to do as much as possible is take a look at the position of the trees. And this is where I've also mentioned the trick, where you can hold a melee unit, but not deploy it, just hold the melee unit, and the tiles that show in green, you can deploy on. The tiles that are not in green, you'll be able to see where the trees and the bushes are. So you can tell, okay, there are trees right here and right there, and you can know where you have to place a wall. So in that case, in this first layout, we have the wall right here, just a single one, and all the enemies from this box will have to go all the way around, and those from there would just have a more direct path to the blue box. So your defense needs to be somewhere in this area, making use of the natural range tile to save on resources and time. Sometimes this can be blocked, so the enemies here will be going there directly, and the enemies from the left still have the same path. The big one about raids is that for some maps and some raids, this is going to have a lot of it depends, and I can't cover all cases because there are way too many raids and too many maps, but they work by checkpoints. What do I mean by this? An enemy doesn't go directly for the blue box. They will go through specific checkpoints. And once they have gone through a checkpoint, they will go to the next one, and then to the next one, and then to the next one, until they reach the blue box itself. Or not, sometimes it just leaves them up. The issue with this is that when you have walls like these that are meant to redirect the enemies, if they are directly on the enemy's path, they will straight up be ignored. So enemies very often have checkpoints in these tiles right here, like the 6 here plus the 2 there. And these are going to be dependent on the different raids. If you place a wall right there, enemies will just collide with it and then break it, and then your defense will fall apart. So it's better to like put this slightly more in the back to avoid most enemy checkpoints. It's not a guarantee that it will work, because sometimes you also have some enemies with some very weird behaviors, and you will also notice that this is not a comfortable defending position because you can have like some ranged enemies. So in some cases, you might be even better off not having any wall and just having like a blocker directly left of the blue box. And then having like maybe an ambusher and a lot of range damage just of range operators here facing right. There is no easy solution. It's going to be with a lot of it depends. Within range, this particular map usually has ballistas on up to 4 different spots. So usually these tiles that look pretty flat, you have ballistas. During raids, these are disabled. So you don't have to worry about them. You can't even damage them when they are disabled. Although, and that's an interesting one if you actually want to farm this map actively, you can actually destroy the different ballistas. They are targetable. These ones are at the very least. So if you've been to this stage and you've been annoyed at the ballistas, just know you can actually deploy your operators to get rid of them. As for the map defense itself, what I mentioned about checkpoints is particularly relevant here because enemies will have indeed a lot of checkpoints in this area, and some of them sometimes even go through some of the trees or some of the walls. My recommendation is do not bother trying to defend this map if you don't have the 3 central trees. Straight in the Abyss is a map with these 2 massive rivers that go through the entire length. By default, it has a bunch of enemies that spawn indefinitely, a bunch of very small squishy summons that rush to the right, and you see there are a bunch of pits here. What you want to do is redirect all the enemies to one side because it saves a bunch of resources. So having just 2 walls right here will force all the enemies to go on this one path, and then you can make use out of the different tiles. I do not recommend trying to throw the enemies inside the pits, not because it's impossible, it's doable, but it requires a specific map layout, and it's what I use in Erasis in particular, so we'll check it later. But for normal gameplay, when you're limited in terms of resources, just stick to having 2 walls to force enemies on one side and call it a day. Gathering of Feathers is a pretty annoying map to defend. It has quite a few bushes as mentioned, some which will render some of your walls, well, it will basically destroy your walls after a bit. I'm not a big fan of defending on that map. Not only because it requires 4 walls to be any good at minimum, but even then it has a lot of issues because these are very exposed to any kind of ranged enemies that could show up. And defending this particular map is not so great considering it's usually next to other maps which are a lot more defensible. However, there is one point that I want to make, which is regarding these. So these are grass tiles. Grass tiles are very interesting behaviors. If you place a construct on them, the construct will be invisible. If you place an operator on them, the operator will be invisible. If you place a battlement, basically a high ground tile, with an operator on top of it, the operator will be invisible, but the tile will no longer be invisible. And so it will be targetable. So you have to keep this in mind. You can't place like a battlement on the grass tile with an operator on top of it. It doesn't matter whether the operator has invisibility or not, the tile will be targeted and destroyed. There is one major thing to know. I did say invisible. The difference between camouflage and invisible is important. Camouflage makes it so that your operators cannot be targeted, but will still be vulnerable to most AoE effects in the game. Invisible operators, on the contrary, not only can't be targeted, but they will also be immune to most AoE effects. So, for example, if you have like an explosive slug, if your operator is invisible because they are on one of these grass tiles, they will not take any damage. So keep that difference in mind. It's going to be very relevant later when we talk about the walls. Primordial Surge is an absolutely terrible map. It is one that was showcased in the previous section about the different raids and boss raids. This is where I fought the line breaker. I actually placed a wall right here to force some of the enemies to have a slightly longer path. But ultimately it was not particularly necessary, so I would just recommend to not bother building resources. It was not Wolves of Stone that were spent on this. The big issue with this is that you can see the bushes here, which means that you have no convenient way of redirecting all the enemies or having a significantly longer path for the enemies. So you could place like 2 walls here, and that's the maximum you can do, basically. Maybe you could place the tiles there, but again, we come back to the usual issue of if there's any enemy with like range attacks or some explosive, some explosion when they die, then it's all for naught. So don't bother building on this particular map too much. Drink water as bait is going to be pretty similar. Not so much because you don't have ways to build a long path for the enemies, but because you have just 2 natural range tiles, just these 2, and you already have a setup which is pretty convenient to force all the enemies on one path. Now the dangerous thing about this map is that enemies usually have a lot of checkpoints in this particular area. So some enemies have checkpoint here, some have here, here, and there. The issue is that if you try to build walls, again, enemies are very likely to just collide with them and destroy them. So Lost Orders is not an easy map to defend. It was one that was showcased when you have a very short path to the blue box. The easiest way to deal with it is indeed to just put these 2 walls here. They can also be shifted upward by 1. But they are pretty exposed to range attackers, which is why there's also a variant like this, which means that the enemies have a shorter path to the blue box and can feel a bit awkward, but at the very least they are better defended from various ranged enemies if you ever encounter an issue with them. Obviously, if you don't have any defenses on this, remember what I mentioned, please have reactive barriers at the ready. Because even when you have operators with reduced DP cost, it's sometimes not enough to deploy your operators in time to actually stop the raid. So having reactive barriers buys you the time necessary to stop the first few enemies that are going through. We're going for the encounter maps. So this is arguably one of the worst maps in the game because you have a direct tie to the blue box and no way to redirect because you can't place a wall here to block the blue box. This will also block the blue box, and this will block just a red box, but you're not allowed to do so. So enemies will always have a chance to go there. Not all raids will have enemies that spawn directly from this, but by default you should just assume that some enemies will spawn from there. You also have the enemies on the right side, which have checkpoints here, and sometimes also on this side. The reason why it can be a problem is because instead of going for a straight line, they're going to follow this kind of path. And then they are not going to go for a straight line, they're going to do something like this. The issue is if you have range tile around here, even if these enemies are melee, they are likely to clip your range tile and kill your ranged operators. So one way to fix the issue would be to have like a wall right here and a wall right there. But even then, the walls in question need to be phantomic barriers. We'll see about this later. For the time being, just don't build any permanent wall here, just stick to reactive barriers. And another point, I did not talk about the weather. When you reach day 20, just day 20, you have a chance of various weather. The first ones you will encounter are the thunder weathers. So the thunderstorm is something that is going to apply like a corrosion effect to all your operators, and it's also going to have some lightning strikes, striking tiles on the map randomly. The smaller the map, the more likely your operators are going to be it. which means that the odds of your operators being straight up one-shot by the weather is actually very, very high in a map like this, because it's going to be a cross. It's a cross with a length of 5, so you can hit two thunder strikes at the same time, and each being 800 true damage. Combined with the fact that the weather reduces the max HP of your operators by 40%, means that not only do they have less HP, but they are also likely to be hit by 2 strikes at the same time. So a lot of your operators will die just because of the weather on this map in particular. So be careful, which is why if you want to fight, keep in mind that fighting in the HQ and outpost, these will never have any kind of weather. You will still have the debuff of the -1 block and the reduced HP, but you will not have Thunderstorm, for example, ever. Fatal Gravel is also a map with a lot of checkpoints that varies depending on the different enemies. What I found to be the safest spot is something like this, if you really want to use walls. However, I would recommend, as much as possible, do not use walls on this map. Instead, just have a bunch of operators and rely on ambushes and slowdowns to actually defeat the enemies, because they tend to have like paths like these, where they zigzag across and then they get to the blue box, but some will zigzag one way and some will zigzag another way. It's a mess. You can use walls, but I do not personally recommend it until later. It's more in case of absolute emergency. Also, because this is an encounter, you can't build walls there right away. You first have to do the encounter, in which you have like an option to select something. And after you've done this, you can click on the map again and it will allow you to go in there, and you have 2 or 4 minutes to build the defenses that you wish. Rock Trail is very basic. You will basically never have to defend on this map, apart from maybe against a Dreambringer. There's not much to say. There's a lot of natural range tiles, and it functions the same as the outpost that we first saw. So just place one wall, it can be there. It can be shifted to the left, it can even be shifted one tile to the right. There's not much to be said. An inviting guest. Okay, so this is these are circled because the map is pretty large. It's a map which has a lot of fortresses. You have to snipe one possible fortresses. You can have one spawn here, one spawn there. There should be one that can spawn in this spot, and one that can spot in this spot as well. That's it. We're talking about the raids, and the fortresses will be disabled. There will be no fortresses, no ballistas, no nothing. All the raids will come, all the enemies come from either the right side or also this incursion point or this incursion point. As a result, it's easier to defend near the blue boxes since it has a set of a few range tiles, and this one is definitely going to be dependent on what operators you have available, which is why we have 2 layouts. So if you place a wall right in this position, all enemies will be funneled in this straight line right here. This is basically an Ifrit lane. This is basically an Ifrit lane, so if you have Ifrit or an operator with similar very long forward facing range, this is probably what you want to go for. So if you have a Fatu, for example, you could. If not, you may consider instead like putting a wall in this position, because all the enemies will be forced there, which is in range of these 3 tiles right there. So if you have shorter ranged operators, this might be what you want to go for instead. And that's basically it for the beginner layouts. So again, don't hesitate to read the various descriptions. I go into more details for each one of them. Let's jump into the headquarters, because the headquarters is both a beginner layout and not quite. And welcome to the HQ map. So before we get started, let's talk very quickly about the different walls that are available to us. By default, there are 5 walls that we can use. We've already seen this one, which is the tier 1 urban style barrier. We have the tier 2 variant, the tier 3 variant, and then we have phantomic barriers. So we have 5 in total. They all redirect the flow of enemies. So in that function, they do not change. The difference between the urban tier 1 and tier 2 is that tier 2 is slightly tankier. Except it's still not as tanky as a reactive barrier, and realistically there is no situation in which you should be using them in the first place. If you do want to redirect the enemies, you can just stick to tier 1 urban barriers and use reactive barriers instead to bait the attacks from the enemies. So you should never ever construct these because they are effectively a waste of resources. That's one less down to worry about. The tier 3 urban barrier, however, is quite interesting. It starts to be costly in the sense that it requires 1 lightning ore, which is a very rare resource. That said, lightning ores are not used for that many things. It's going to be used mainly for these camouflaged walls, because these happen to have camouflage. Remember what I mentioned earlier? Camouflage does not make those immune to area of effects, but it does mean they won't be targeted. So if you have issues with ranged enemies, you should be using them. And then we have the phantomic barriers. So the difference between a phantomic barrier and an urban style barriers is that these have 0 block. The advantage is that you won't get into situations where the enemies can clip them, because sometimes you have a layout where if you were, for example, to have something like this, if enemies try to get to the front or the bottom of the HQ, and we zoom out, enemies from the top can try to take a path like this, but sometimes they clip into one of these 2 walls. And if they do, they will break those walls, and then enemies will have a shortcut directly to your HQ. It's some quirks of the pathfinding behavior, and phantomic barriers solve that issue by preventing enemies from just clipping those, blocking them, and then breaking your defenses. However, the phantomic barrier tier 1 is pretty bad because it can still be targeted by ranged enemies, and it's also very costly. So realistically, you don't want to build it either, and you want instead to stick to Phantom Barrier tier 2, which has invisibility, meaning it can't be targeted and is not susceptible to various area of effect attacks from enemies, which in turn means it's effectively indestructible. If you place a phantomic barrier somewhere, the enemies have effectively no way of destroying them by any means, which is very good if you have something which is very risky, but also costs 5 lightning ore, which is 5 times as much as an urban T3 barrier. So these are the 3 kinds of barriers that we are going to be using. With most of the beginning, obviously you're gonna stick to tier 1. Later on, realistically you only need urban T3. The phantomic barriers tier 2 are frankly overkill apart from some very specific scenarios. We'll talk about this slightly later. For the time being, let's just erase those and see how we handle the HQ. So in the HQ, you have enemies coming from 6 different directions. With a setup like this, all the enemies will be forced towards the bottom of the HQ. In that case, you kind of want to build all your rice plants and all your other utility buildings, your production buildings at the top. It's going to be far away enough from the action that they will not be destroyed, and that will save you a lot of resources in the long run. That being said, I did mention that as much as possible, we don't want to intercept raids at the HQ as much as possible, because even a setup as basic as this is still 11 barriers. That's 22 stones right here for something that can be achieved in other maps for just 2 or 3 barriers usually. Even with this is still a pretty mediocre setup because it doesn't leave you a ton of room. First off, it's very susceptible to ranged enemies. You can't defend against any ranged enemy with this. So instead, if you want to actually protect against this, you will have to expand and make what I tend to refer to as a claw. So a claw is something like this, for example. This is a part of the claw. So enemies will be forced through the bottom of it, and then they will go up, which is very convenient for a lot of operators with a straight line, including the good old Ifrit, but she's not the only one. Then you can place a bunch of range tiles basically everywhere, and you can have a kill zone right in this position. You can also place a few tiles at the bottom depending on the range of the enemies. But as mentioned, if there are ranged enemies, you might run into trouble. On top of this, there is another thing that you need to consider, which are wings. So what are wings? I did talk about clipping issues. If enemies come from there, they have a good chance of clipping this wall in particular, which can be a big problem. So how do we solve the problem? We place a wall there and same on the other side. So we just mirror it. What this means is that the enemies there will try instead to get closer to this particular tile, and it will limit the risk that they actually clip with any of these walls. On top of this, even if they do clip with the wall, it's just this that's breaking. It's not this. So enemies won't suddenly have a shortcut to your base. So the wings in question really are a safety feature to ensure that the enemies don't break through your defenses because of some weird pathfinding quirk. So a setup like this is very basic. The range tiles have to be adjusted depending on your operators. You don't have to use these. It's like you can very well have some on the side instead, or not. It really depends on your particular needs and your particular account. That said, this is still very vulnerable to range attackers. This is where the tier 3 barrier comes in. Because we are forcing all enemies near the bottom, we don't have to upgrade everything to a tier 3, we can just focus on upgrading only the bottom ones to a tier 3, and that will limit the risk of ranged enemies just destroying your walls. So probably want to do also for these, and if we have some enemies coming in, usually these two will be too far for most ranged enemies to deal with. There are some exceptions, for example, if there are enemies with like rocket launchers and the like. But if you're dealing with rocket launchers in your HQ, I feel bad for you. You definitely want to have a bunch of battlements and reactive barriers scattered around the map to bait the shot. And this is in case of emergency. As much as possible, you should be avoiding this. Now, this setup will be enough for most of the campaign. If you want to play Reclamation Algorithm Critical Contention, which is a special game mode at the end where you have to survive for 18 days to get all the rewards, there are some enemies with AoEs that will get to your HQ most likely. Because it's very difficult to mitigate those, especially the Sarkaz flag bearers, because just by moving around, they will throw some AoEs around. One approach that you could do is, again, make sure that you don't have any production building in this area, because it will probably be destroyed anyway. It's much better if you want to go in critical contention to gather resources first, and then once you jump into the mode, you just remove the buildings there and you build your actual defenses. So how would I go about making a pretty cheap setup for critical contention, for someone who just wants to go in for the rewards and then not stick to the mode any longer. This is one way you could go about it. We are simply adding a few phantomic barriers near the bottom, and we are extending the wings a little bit so that the enemies are further away from where your operators and your ranged battlements will be. The phantomic barriers here, as mentioned, are there to prevent AoE damage from just destroying your walls so that you are safer. If you want the enemies to stay closer to the sides of the map, all you need to do realistically is simply expand these a bit. You might want to have phantomic barriers here to prevent any kind of risk, and you just mirror it on the other side. So we don't need this anymore. And doing something like this will be sufficient to force the enemies really to the side of the map. Technically, you can also decide to expand the wings here to have more room, but ultimately that shouldn't be a big deal. You have all this area to build battlements already, and you don't have that many operators to deploy in the first place, so you should be fine. If you still want room at the bottom of the map, I did move those forward a little bit. If you don't want to move forward, you can instead place it something akin to this, and then you still have room for your battlements here. For the Desolate Interception outpost, there are not too many changes, just some additional walls to ensure that all the enemies coming from the bottom are really forced on this lane. These are swapped to Urban Tier 3 since they have camouflage, and just a Phantomic Barrier Tier 2 to really straighten out the path of the enemies. And then you can have like your usual kill zone somewhere around this area, and that way you don't have to worry about enemies coming to multiple sides, and you don't have to worry about area of effects. So it just allows you to have things under control. For the wide open interception map, it's effectively identical to the beginner layout, except these are just upgraded to camouflage wall, and this one, since it will be where most of the fighting happens, has been replaced with Phantomic Barrier Tier 2 to avoid some accidental AoE from breaking your defenses. And finally, the mountainous interception point. We are still not going to make use of the pits. It's not necessary until much later in Era ACC. So if you're just going for day 18, just kill enemies the old-fashioned ways. Same as usual, you can just have your usual setup where you force the enemies through. So you can put it this way, or you can instead put it this way, depending on your particular account, with a bunch of operators set in this position. Next up, I'll go over the layouts that I personally use for my own account. So these are the layouts specifically for people who are interested in pushing critical contention. That is to say, you finish a regular Reclamation Algorithm campaign, you go into critical contention, and then you try to stay for as long as possible. So if you're just going for day 18, don't bother copying these. They are just straight up not necessary. There's just no point to it. You're going to spend so much time farming resources that will be so overkill as to be completely pointless. As a reminder, I had a video quite literally on how to go to day 18 without using a single operator. And even then, I did not spend that many resources on the various layouts. So go ahead and check that one out if you want some ideas on how to approach it. But in the meantime, let's focus on the layouts for the actual run. So I'm currently on the way to day 2000. These layouts are specifically pre-Chen 3. So I had a video specifically on how Chen 3 or Chen Alter, how she's going to change how the wall progression is going to be approached. But these are my current layouts, so these have not been changed. Once Chen 3 is out, I will add a new tab with the updated layouts, but until then, this is what I'm running. We'll start with headquarters, but for headquarters, it's probably better if we go directly into the game. So there we are. In the headquarters themselves, it's very, very basic. The walls on the sides, which should probably be phantomic barriers, although as you can see, if I'm by day 2000 I still don't have issues. It's still fine to have like just urban freeze for the most part here. It's this area in particular which absolutely needs the phantomic barriers, because this is where we'll have a bunch of AoEs. Sometimes I have some rocket launchers that from this position right here can actually land it on some operators there, so that's why phantom barriers are absolutely required. The setup is very basic. All the enemies come from the bottom side, and there is this particular form. I don't have the enemies just going straight from the bottom instead of going straight from the side. This is because usually I have a setup where I have Ifrit with Delta Mod in this position facing right, and I have Blaze Archer in this position also facing right. On top of this, higher up, I can place you there facing in this position and making sure that the wall is right here, because there's a wall of fire, and the wall of fire has infinite range. So even from its position, it can ensure that both Ifrit and Blaze can get their additional burn on the enemies. On top of this, you have to keep in mind that the layouts I have are built also for my account and for the operator I use, and one operator I use a lot is Ulpianus. Ulpianus has a forward range on his skill tree of 6 tiles. So let's say I have Ulpianus exactly on this position. You count how many tiles it is, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, meaning the anchor will land exactly here. So if you want to prevent Ulpianus from constantly being teleported, either you place an ambusher here, or any operator with 0 block, but ambushers are pretty convenient, or you can place, okay, I can't place it here, but you can place an hunting net launcher, which can be positioned during combat and cannot be destroyed by enemies. Another thing would be an SP battery, but it costs more resources, so I'd rather just use hunting net launchers. It really depends on what you're looking to do. For the layout of the map itself, it's also fairly simple. These extra lanes are just there to buy some time. So let's say there is some catastrophic failure and I happen to have my main stallers die. All I need to do to buy some time is I can place a wall right here, and the enemies will be going to one side and they go all the way around, and then they will go down. And then when they're about to get to this position, I can place another wall here, and then they'll have to go all the way back up, and they have to go all the way around, and same thing on the other side. And once they are here, I can just remove this barrier and then place one there, and I can keep repeating it over and over again to bounce them, and that way I have the time to retrieve all my stallers in time to make sure that I have everything needed to actually eliminate all the enemies. So this is a general approach. The other reason why I wanted to show the HQ directly in game is because of the resources and the resource production itself. I have all the usual production buildings when it comes to, for example, this produces iron, we have stone here, and we also have the extra deployment slot and life points, as well as the rice plants. The only buildings that I'm really missing are large corrals. I have 10 out of 20 possible large corrals, but also additional large corrals are not particularly necessary in my case. You can see that I already have enough, and by day 2000 I am at a net positive when it comes to resources. So realistically, this is for my personal use cases and the kind of resources that I use during my runs, but these are the kind of creatures that I have in my own zoo, basically, that allows me to sustain an RACC progression run indefinitely. So you're gonna have some variance between the different players because, for example, I don't use neural chain regularly unless I'm dealing maybe with the Serrator, for example. I don't use necrosis transmitter at all anymore. So I'm not gonna need as many resources as someone who might be like less comfortable and might need to use like more SP batteries or more ore barriers or maybe more fog machines and the like. So it depends on what exactly you're looking to do. Going back to the spreadsheet, as usual, we're going to have a description for the different effects, so the headquarters we've seen. Let's go into Mountainous Interception Point. Mountainous Interception Point has these constructs near the left, and as mentioned, all the enemies are coming from these two tiles will try to go to the undeployable tiles right here. So those two incursion points will force enemies to actually get there, and they will have to go all the way back. This allows you to save a bit of time, and it makes it pretty convenient to just have time to deploy your operators and build resources. So I will usually open the stage with like Texas, Metal, and Elysium right here, or I might do a variant with agents with usually puzzle. If I really want a lot of DP really fast, I might have a Chill Check or Surfer or Cantabile. But more often than not, this is a map that's large enough for it to not be an issue. If I have an Alpianus right here, facing left, he will land his anchor exactly on this tile. Now it's important when I use Alpianus, he uses SP cost minus 55% food. The way I can sustain using that kind of food is because I do slug races. Slug races allow me to always have some seasoning to use, not for too many operators because you don't get that many in the first place, but Alpianus is so potent that I feel the need that, yeah, Alpianus is absolutely deserving of getting that food because it means that on his own, without any external help, it can very consistently permastall anything that can be done, which is to say everything apart from flying enemies and the bosses. Apart from this, we have a straight line to the pits, so this is fairly straightforward, there's not much to be said. If I want to use Unictus here, usually I place her in this position with an SP battery there to boost her up, and then have two ambushers in these two positions. I have this Phantom Barrier move slightly to the right so that I can actually fit like Weedy or F-Eater facing top, and Geet still giving an SP battery for additional SP support. Although, since if I'm using pushers, more likely than not, they're instead going to be somewhere in this position and pushing the enemies straight into the hole. So, pretty straightforward map. It's just throw the enemies into the hole whenever you can. Have all players in this position, Unictus there, along with some ways to slow down the enemies. If it's not possible, maybe because I'm dealing with Rain Guardians that have damage deflect, I can just have all players on this tile with an anti-net launcher and just keep spamming his skill along with someone to slow down the Rain Guardians so they can be thrown into the wall without issues. The wide open interception point is one that actually had a redesign built specifically for Unictus. So the idea there is to have a map which allows Unictus to stall entirely on her own, with no other way to support her. If she's here, the enemies have to go all the way through this, and through this entire duration, they are within range of her taunt. Remember, Unictus can taunt all enemies in a very large range and force them to come to her position every time she activates her skill. Skill 2 in that case, because it's the one skill that has a better skill cycling. So this is part of why there was a redesign of this map. It used to be significantly worse for Unictus, and that's why I wanted to rework it. It also leaves a lot of room here for my various squares because I have some setups that do take quite a bit of space. For example, the Blaze View, if I want to also bring Warfaring and Recall Keeper, the positioning can be a bit awkward, and so having more room is a bonus. The weird shape here is because of how this is set up. This is set up in such a way that if I want a short stall for Eunictus instead of having the long one, let's say there is a Sail Raider. I want to stall the enemies somewhere in this position and have the Sail Raider stall somewhere on this tile. As such, I'm going to have like Eunictus there. It allows the ambushes to be able to stall the enemy for an additional tiles if I do it this way, or sometimes even 2 tiles if it's like an Omeri Psychical combo, which is why there is this little bit of S shape going on. Now, that doesn't explain why there is this. The reason why there are this weird space is not because I intend to place any operators there. I could actually place Eunictus here, that could be an option. But it's actually because if there is a pusher here and they push enemies in this direction, the enemies will be within these 2 tiles. So if this wall was not here but was instead there, the enemies are pushed into this tile could simply just go down and just keep the defenses. So it's also a possible spot for Eunictus on top of a safety for the pushers if I need to use the pushers, because for some reason I might end up using Eunictus and Openness for a very specific raid combo, which is very dangerous. If I feel like it, I might do a setup with just ambushes plus pushers. That being said, it's pretty rare. It's probably one of the safest maps to actually intercept raids, simply because if you have just Eunictus with a stall, there's not much that's going to be he's there able to kill her. We have a natural range tile next to her, so I can just put a medic. I do not use Omni Umbrella anymore, so I don't have any problem with using a medic next to Eunictus. Desolate Interception Point. Okay, so that one is quite something. Enemies come all the way there, then they go down, they go around this spot, there is a bit of a weird shape, and then they get back here. If things go really bad, I can also delete this particular wall and force the enemies out in this particular area to come back, although it's something I don't usually do. There are a lot of spots that are viable for Eunictus to stall. There is a very long stall version where you place Eunictus in this position, and she will cover all the enemies that are all there. It's kind of overkill, and I don't really do it anymore, but it is in some situations when there are like global ranged enemies on top of like an Araphic raid, for example. I had a situation where I needed to use like Eunictus, healer with like camouflage, and then a Virtuosa, because I didn't want to deal with both the damage reflect and the global range archers. So it's a very long stall, but it's something that basically guarantees that you will kill almost any raid. Technically, if there is a Ringbringer, it could spell trouble, but I've not fought the Ringbringer in this particular outpost for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days, because I've got to the point where I can very consistently kill the Ringbringer without issues on the first or the second tile that the Raidbringer spawns in. The first or second node, sorry. Apart from that, there are also some interesting quirks in how I deal with most raids. Because the enemies go through this particular U shape, I have a few options. If I have all pianos right on this tile right here, facing left, the anchor will land right there. So usually have an ambusher here facing down, and then I have Blaze Altar on this tile facing left, because during skill 3 she will have enough range to actually hit the enemies there, and because we need a position for you, I usually have him there facing left. So the firewall is going to be along this length. And the reason why also I'm doing this is because I'm using the SP cost down food on you, not the camouflage one, the SP cost down. So with this, the enemies will usually be stunned. They will be slowed down by the ambushes. They will be stunned on this tile, and Blaze will be able to freely kill everything whilst they're getting the buff from you. And this is... the spot for you is still safe enough that even rocket launchers can't actually reach him. Just barely, but they can't reach him if you're tight enough on the opener stun. And then the boss usually gets stalled somewhere around this area, depending on which raid I'm dealing with. The alternative killing option is, because we have a tile right here, is Permanix Alter. She's a new solo raid killer in town, and she's absolutely amazing at it, because not only does she have very significant permanent damage that she can deal to all enemies, but she can also control the enemies. She can slow down enemies a ton. And in this particular tile, yeah, if you have Unique Test in this position, the enemies will be in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different tiles where she will be able to reach them. So Permanix, Unique Test, and maybe an ambusher to slow down enemies a bit further. But yeah, you have quite a few spots here to place Unique Test, place Permanix, place Blaze you. It's like most of the raid killing happens here. There is one variant, however, with the Sail Raider, because the Sail Raider only has melee enemies in its raid. Usually I have an openness here facing up, because it's somewhere around the middle of the map. And as such, he will basically always be in range to stall, well, not to stall, but to bait the shots of the Sail Raider. That way I can have like Tragedy on this spot, facing left, and all the way here the Sail Raider will always be targeting all pillars, because it constantly refreshes his skill tree. Gain mana to pass and taxed with a choice. It's the exact same map, but not quite. Taxed with a choice is actually the fortress version, which is closer to the center of the first region. And in there, the only boss that spawns is a Rainbringer. But the general approach doesn't really change. The enemies will almost never spawn from these two spots, so they'll usually just go around. I have a fairly tight setup here where if it's a Rainbringer that comes in, and let's be honest, the Rainbringer is the one that is going to constrain your setup the most, I usually have openness right on this position with an anti-net launcher there, an SP battery is there to prevent him from being moved every single time, and I have Teopsis here facing down, and I can have Blaze Altar here facing left. If needed, I can also have an anti-net launcher that way she is able to constantly fire even if there are no enemies within that tiles, but it's rarely necessary. And then I can have you chilling somewhere around here, usually facing right side, because I don't necessarily want to give the burn buff to other operators. And the Rainbringer will be stalled exactly between these two tiles. So it'll be left right here. And this area, I'm gonna have usually a Wizardale on skill 1 facing down, along with a gas jet thrower and an SP battery to deal with the spiders. For the rest of the raids, so it's mostly going to be applied to get Malu to pass, which is north of the starting region, north of your HQ. The prime spot is going to be this one, because it's a convenient spot for Unique Test. She can have 2 SP batteries. There is a natural range tile, so even if there are Vayne Guardians, I can put like a medic on this tile and they will be able to keep Unique Test alive. And this is usually enough to just deal with most of the raids. Then I have all the flexibility I want to bring any kind of damage dealers. If there are like global range archers, what I like to do is have a Mitten somewhere in the bottom to bait everything. I can bring some ambushers. if I need some fully camouflaged operators, a combo I usually go for is Ascalon, Umiri, and Sakiko. Umiri and Sakiko are both on S1 because I don't want to click this all the time, and Ascalon usually on scale 2 to provide a bit more crowd control and a bit more slowdowns, but S1 also works fine. Towering Pass, very basic. The only boss rate that spawns here is not one of the major ones, it's just a Rusthammer warrior with the global ranged archer. But same thing as the previous one, if you have Mitum you can just bait all the attacks. This is basically just 2 walls with an S shape. Unit test here, or having openness somewhere in this area facing up. Outside of HQ, a good note regarding openness is that I have Psilopsis with the SP recovery food. You have a few variants of that food, but I'm using specifically the one that with 2 seasoning gives 1 SP every 2.2 seconds to operators within range. So with Psilopsis, it's very convenient because there's a bit of a leeway. If you're a bit late to activate openness skill, more likely than not, you will still have enough of a leeway that if you're a bit late, the enemy will still be permastalled. You don't have to be exactly on point with his stats. And that's true not just for this map, it's true for any map outside of HQ and Outpost. So not much else to be said. We have a bunch of range tiles available to get the kills. I don't think there's any Guardian that can show up here, so very easy map to deal with. Let's move on. Okay, Jagged Jungle is where things start getting quite spicy. This is a pretty complicated map. The reason why I have this weird setup is because I had a few raids where if I had just these 2 walls, sometimes enemies will still just go through at random. I might do an experiment again where I just remove these 2, but I'd rather not. I also have a setup here with a phantomic barrier there. The way I've set up the 2 watchtowers is at the bottom. This spot is usually reserved for operators because I want to stall the Ringbringer on this location usually. So I'm gonna have like Tragodia here and the Ringbringer will be between these 2 tiles. And then I can have like some extra operators there to kill. And I also have some room here if I want to have some agents or to generate DP, or maybe just do standard flag bearers. Maybe I want to save some time. Maybe have a thunderstorm going on and I have a failed beast to keep baiting the thunder strikes. It really depends. At the bottom, this is where most of the killing happens. So this is a prime spot for openers because it is far away enough from the enemies that in most cases it will be safe unless you're dealing with like very long range enemies like the rocket launcher, for example, or the Sail Raider. If I'm dealing with the Sail Raider, I don't even think the Sail Raider... Wait, can the Sail Raider even go through here? Wait, can the Sail Raider go through here? I don't recall. Okay, I'm maybe a bit confused. I think it's been a long while since I had to fight the Sail Raider here. I don't know why. Wow. Oh well, whatever. So anyway, openers here on this position with a Ptilopsis here facing left. We have a natural range tile there, usually for Blaze facing down, and that means I can just place you right there or right there with his wall on this particular line. So I'm really making the most out of the fact that use S3 has a very large range to really put him in a safe spot while Blaze Alter has camouflage food and can just happily blast things without issues. If I want to use Unictus, I have a few spots. Usually this one will allow you to pull all the enemies without issues that are here and up to approximately this tile. So this tile is the last one where she will be able to pull enemies, but that means that she has some decent coverage, but she will still need some slowdown support if there are some fast enemies. For example, if you are dealing with, say, on Horrific Raid, That being said, my approach for an honorific raid does not utilize unique tests at all anymore. Hopefully I get to live stream how I approached it with openers, but the setup I have for openers specifically and honorific is I actually kill everything in this spot because I have enough room for Blaze Altar, Record Keeper, you, openers, and Warfaring as well. Warfaring is used also to really help trigger some damage on Blaze so that Record Keeper can then activate the buff. The reason why I do this is because I do not have Lean. If you have Lean on scale 2, you don't need to do this. It just, you do get a bit more damage by using Warfaring, but frankly, the extra damage is not necessarily that convenient in the first place. It's not going to be particularly relevant most of the time. If you have a Lean on your account, build Lean and build her scale 2, because she's the enabler for your AoE damage, and in particular for Blaze Altar to just absolutely blast the hell out of Honorific's raid. She will generally be able to kill all the enemies before you reach the target cap of 128 enemies. In the meantime, usually you have Tragodia on this tile facing down, and Honorific would just be stalled here without issues. Okay, that's about it for the Jagged Jungle. It's quite a dense map. There's a lot to be said about it. Masters of Forest. This one doesn't have a lot to be said because there are no boss raids. Most of the enemies that come in are spiders, so I just have like a Woody on scale 2 here facing down. I recall some Shiner Aizong, so it can be like the Secret Keepers and also the Guardians with the shields. That's the only enemies that can show up if I recall from the Shiner Aizong. So most of the time, yeah, it's just we there along with possibly Wisdale or Grey Altar or any kind of slowdowns, and then possibly a Manticore or some ambushes. It's very basic. There's not much to be said. Just push the enemies and kill them from distance if it's the explosive spiders. That's pretty much all there is. Okay, Shrubbery Galore. Oh boy. Shrubbery Galore. Because of the way the map is laid out, I have my 2 watchtowers on these because realistically I'm never going to place any operator in there. So all the action is actually focused at the top. So let's see what's happening at the top. It's an absolutely terrible map to defend, but you still have technically 2 ways to go about it. One is to make use of all pillars. It's not the most comfortable because you will need a way to slow down enemies to crawl, or otherwise you're going to have a lot of licks. So remember what I said about openers previously? He has a frontal range of 6. So if I place him on this tile right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, his anchor will land right there. Alternatively, you can place him right here and the anchor will land right on this tile. Well, if you do, you probably want to have like an ambusher or something there, especially because if you have enemies here that gets in front of him, the anchor will explode there, and that means the enemies on this lane will no longer be stunned. So you ideally want the anchor to explode either there or there. Make sure the enemies don't go through. That being said, it's not the most reliable because it also puts openers in a pretty dangerous position. If they are ranged enemies, they might be able to shoot at openers if they have even a modicum of range. The other choice, the other possibility, is to use Glaucus. If you use Glaucus, you can place her in this position, pump her full of SP batteries. You'll need a lot of DP at the start to actually get her to stall the enemies. If you have a lot of rushing enemies, it might be a bit of trouble, but she will be generally capable of stunning all the lanes at the same time. It doesn't happen all that often. Most of the time, when there is a raid that spawns in Shrubbery Galore, I am in one of 2 situations. Either There's also a raid in Kidmalaru Pass, which means that it's going to merge in the outpost. So I'm just going to kill the raid, which is currently in Shrubbery Galore, the day after, at the same time as I kill another raid. Or alternatively, it just ends up that the raid in Shrubbery Galore, I'm not particularly interested in killing it because there is another raid that I need to prioritize. It might be the Ringbringer, for example. If I have the Ringbringer and a smaller raid somewhere else, I'm gonna be prioritizing these two instead of going for Shrubbery Galore. Especially if there are ranged enemies in Shrubbery Galore. In that case, I don't even bother intercepting any raid here. It's just not worth the risk. Treasure in the trees. This map is going to have quite a few bosses going through it, including Alrafik, the Ringbringer, the Sail Raider, the Annihilator, and that's about it. But these are some of the most dangerous boss raids that you can face, and as such, the map is designed in such a way that it's going to counter them, but some of the timings in particular can be particularly tight. So, the general approach is to make use of what's in the middle to set up your kill zone and stalling. If you have like an openers in the vicinity, you can even have an openers in the back right ear facing left. And I usually have a hunting net launcher right here to make sure that openers does not move while throwing his anchor. And you'll still stun the enemies in the 3 tiles right there. On top of this, I can still have a position here where I can place some operators and still provide some additional support. If I have, for example, a Recoil Keeper, a Warfarine, or even a Ptilopsis. If I have a Ptilopsis right here, I can have Blaze Altar sitting right there, facing left. And she will still be in range to benefit from the extra SP recovery. Now, this is just the general approach for most raids. Specifically for the Ringbringer, because that one is most tight in terms of timing and just space, you definitely want to have the hunting net launcher here and stunning the enemies there. The Ringbringer will be stalled between these two tiles. Tragodia will be sitting right here facing left. All the spiders will be summoned on this tile and they will be going in a straight array direction. And because I usually have Wizardel here and a gas jet thrower there, the gas jet thrower is basically permanent. It's always going to be there facing left. The spiders will be stalled, but sometimes, and especially during phase 2, some of them will be pushed behind this particular wall. And what that means is that they go all the way around, which is not a problem because it just means that they are going through the kill zone where there is openers and usually Blaze you, just doing all the damage. During phase 2, this is, and also for the boss killing, actually I'm gonna go over the boss killing part, because you have a bunch of spiders sitting there, this means that these 2 tiles are actually very dangerous. To speed up the kill, because the Ringbringer is right there, I usually end up with Kyubi on this tile, and here I have a Suzerain. Both of them are facing right to avoid being distracted by the spiders in the back, also because you definitely don't want to kill them. And once I've guaranteed that all the rest of the raid is dead, I can place like a gas jet thrower here facing up, usually with an SP battery. I can retreat most of the operators in the middle, and I can add like a Saria and Ifrit and just deal with the bosses that way. It's a bit annoying because you do have to expend more resources. Technically, you could keep the openers there and buy some time, but it's not super convenient. Another aspect is that, and this is very specific to the Rainbringer, there is no apparent change in attack speed to the Rainbringer according to the wiki. However, what I suspect that there is that it might be that the animation for the Rainbringer's attack, specifically the Force Swing, which is the first part of the attack animation, actually is shorter during phase 2. which leads to a situation in which, even though you could have stalled the Rimbringer for the entire time with Tragodia without any kind of issue, is that after a point, if you do not have any additional attack speed buff or attack buff for Tragodia, you will end up in a situation in which a Rimbringer can actually land a few attacks. It's going to be very sparse, but it's going to be just a few, but it can lead to some of your operators dying. Usually it's going to be your DPS operators if you are on phase 2, so it's not going to be too much trouble. You're going to lose a bit of time, but it is important to keep that in mind, because this can lead to the situation crumbling. It also means that it cannot be fully AFK. So during the transition to phase 2, you can use a few operators that are not the one dedicated to stalling the Rainbringer. The operator of choice I have for splitboxing and surviving the phase 2 transition with the Rainbringer is Spectral Altar, because she has only a block count of 1 due to the weather, so she's only going to block the boss and no one else. And she has a guaranteed immortality for the entire duration of her skill 2, which is 15 seconds, if I recall. So instead, I'm going to try to use something else during the phase transition, even if I sacrifice like you, or it doesn't matter anyone else. And then I will place Spectral Altar right there, because she's not going to be in position where the spiders will explode off and off to actually be able to kill her. And that way, she'll keep drawing the attack from the Rimbringer in case things go poorly. That's about it for the Rimbringer. Apart from this one thing, the doubling firecasters will have their fireballs because they will be stalled around here. The fireballs have the time to go and do all of this. That means that these 4 tiles are effectively banned. If you use a Wizardel on skill 1 as I do, and there's a summon, it will go here and it will explode the summon. If you have any operator, which is the case there for me because I have Tragodia usually on this tile, they will die. So remember to remove your summon if you use a Wizardel on this spot, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. Another thing that, and I'll probably make another video about it, about like a tier list for tools, because I think it's unironically, it might actually be interesting. The Necrosis Transmitter is both a very potent tool and also very dangerous when dealing with a Ringbringer. Because the modern approach is no longer to rely on Shobai for stalling. If you rely on Tragodia is always going to be within range of the Ringbringer. Even if the Ringbringer is at the edge of Tragodia's range, it will still be within his range. So what you want to make sure is that you are not using the Necrosis Transmitter, because you will have a bunch of fireballs exploding in this vicinity, and if too many of them explode right here, Tragodia will no longer be able to stall, because there will be Necrosis Burst ongoing instead of a Nervous Impairment, meaning the boss will no longer have paralysis and he will be able to attack you operators. So that's another thing to consider. It's not true for all maps. In some of the maps you have so much distance between where the raid is being stalled and the Ringbringer that it's not a concern, but it's still something important to keep in mind. Within range, there are some variation on the layouts, and actually there are 2 within range map, and they tend to have different raids as well. The boss raids that go through there are, as far as I'm concerned, only the Ringbringer. It's only the Ringbringer that you're gonna face. Some of the other raids that you will face in this position have a tendency to sometimes have some very weird checkpoints that lead them to just go straight through your defenses. Luckily, it doesn't happen all too often, but it does happen at times. And if you play on this map long enough, you will notice that some of them have some very weird behaviors, like some enemies. So just to go over the basic path, this is the entrance. Enemies have to go all the way around, and then they'll get here. and then they go up to the blue box. But sometimes some of them will go here, and then they go all the way back, because they have a checkpoint somewhere around here, for example. Or some will try to reach a position around there. Or some will go through the blue box on this tile, for example. There are a lot of weird pathfinding quirks, and also for the Ringbringer raid itself, funnily enough, enemies will actually walk through this wall, specifically, but they don't cross the middle of the tile. So the only tile they are allowed to exit from is actually the right one. So it's very scary because they get in there and actually they walk back. Luckily, they don't have enough speed, because if you had like a charger, they actually have so much speed and momentum that they would go through the tile and they would have enough speed to keep going. In this particular area, I usually have a battlement or two like set here. This is going to be the area dedicated to both stalling and killing the raid. So you have like room for Optilopsis, then you can have like Blaze, Openers facing right, and then you can have like you there, also facing right, because you want the burn wall to be right there, and you eliminate the raid right there. You can have like the hunting knight launcher right here, not a problem. If you're curious as to why this particular wall is shifted, it's because there is one raid where the enemies go specifically to this tile. I don't remember which raid, but I remember specifically that they went through there, and so I fixed it by just shifting this tile in particular. It doesn't make any difference for the Ringbringer specifically, but it's just for that other raid. And for the stalling of the boss himself, the boss is going to be stalled right between these two tiles. So the boss reaches this, and you push back with like a Spectral Altar. Then I have a Tragodia here facing down, and then I can place a KOB in the back. Not in the front, because if you have KOB here, the boss will summon spiders here, and she wastes a few attacks, so you want to have KOB right there, facing down, and then Ifrit. And that way, I end up with, in a single spot, I have both the team dedicated to killing the raid and stalling it, as well as a team dedicated to stalling and killing the boss. So I save a bit of time by just dropping the boss to like maybe 30 or so % HP by the time all the enemies from the raid come and die. So it's a nice way to save a bunch of time. I also mentioned a guest jet thrower. I have a guest jet thrower which is located, if I'm correct, I think right here, facing down, with a range tile, usually with a Wizardel, because she's my classic. Wizardel on S1 is just what I use to stall the raid in question. In that case, I don't bother retreating or summon, because the fireballs are usually going to expire somewhere around this area. So I don't have to worry about the summon exploding and then killing Wizardel or anything. And that's about it for that one. There are not too many differences. Sometimes you get the Shine Eyes on, sometimes you get some spiders. If you get a raid with just spiders, you have the gas jet thrower just in position already, so I just need to bring Grey Altar, Wizardel, or Rosemontes, or any kind of AoE physical work, or the classic that have AoE, you can still be using Blazer, but in that case you're better off just using someone else, because anything really works. And that, yeah, you should not place, so you have a lot of free tiles right there. If you're dealing with a Ringbringer specifically, you should not be adding anything there, because it will be in range of the Ringbringer. Like, if you have the Ringbringer going through this, you have to consider that only this row is going to be safe. And that's about it. You can also add a few blue tiles right here, a few walls on this location to force, especially these two, to force the enemies to go even straighter if you want to have this spot being safe, for example. But that's about the only modification that could be brought to this map. There are some variations, ultimately, in the position of walls, but the general idea is going to remain the same. You could also technically just have the enemies go up and have the entry point being somewhere around the top, you can just rotate this 90 or 180 degrees, you can mirror it. You have a few ways to approach this setup. It's just a way of saying, yeah, this is a basic template, do whatever you want to, spin it around, rotate it. Next up, login taxation. So login taxation, the notable points is that these three tiles are high ground tiles with bushes on them, which means you can just drop any kind of operator on them and they will be invisible to all kinds of areas. On top of this, no boss raid ever goes through this node. So even if you're dealing with the sarcasm casters, not the ones that like chain your operators, but those that throw AoEs around at regular intervals, it's not a problem. You can perfectly put an operator there, and they will be safe. So an easy way to approach it is you have unique tests here, and then your ambushes there, or Permanent Altar here, some way to slow down the enemies, and you can just keep pulling the enemies back and forth. Or you have openers right here. If I have openers there, usually I'll have Telopsis on this spot, facing left, so that you can provide some SP support, and then any kind of DPS option here. So Prime Altar or Blaze Altar with you somewhere, doesn't really matter. If I use Blaze Altar, I'll probably have to wait until the entire raid is here, because there's no particularly convenient spot for you, but that's okay. Because you have access to these tiles, you're pretty safe. The double layered camouflage walls here, phantomic barriers, are there a safety feature? Just to make sure that absolutely no enemy will ever attempt to go here, because even if they have a checkpoint even on this tile, they will still have to go down. If they have a checkpoint on this tile, they still have to go around to actually reach it. Straight in the Abyss. This stage has a lot of ways you could approach it. I personally went with the approach of just having something very streamlined that forces all the enemies on one side. And I could technically open up this part to also have the same setup. The reason why this works, even though it shouldn't, is because the pathfinding is a bit weird in Arknights. Why am I mentioning this? Because if you don't really experiment with it, you might think that enemies would do something along the lines of this, because this is the shortest line to the blue box. If you're coming from one of these incursion points, the shortest line is this. But for some obscure reason, this is not what the enemies do at all. They just hug the top wall the entire way through, which means that they then come down, and when they do this, you can see that, well, they are right next to the walls. So you can have I have 3 different gas jet throwers right here, 3 of them, and then I can supplement it by having like Olayak right here facing up, with usually Enforcer or Effector, and then a Weedy here specifically for the boss. Because they are not going straight down, but a bit of a diagonal, when it comes to the bosses, if they have a weight of 6, I have to wait until they're closer to this tile in particular to make sure that I don't miss my shot and that they actually fall into the pit. That's one thing I need to consider. The only annoying issue about this is that because I have 3 gas jet throwers, if I'm dealing with ranged enemies, it can be a problem because they can just break it. Meaning I might end up having to break one of them and then use a camouflage tool to protect them, or I might have to just destroy them entirely, or I might need to find a way to bait the range attacks. If I'm dealing with rocket launchers, I can have like a midterm in this position and just place his summon at maximum range. And that way all the rocket launchers will waste their shot there and they'll just be thrown by the gas jet throwers without me having to worry about their safety. Out of all the raids that come here, I still have a bit of a problem because of this when it comes to dealing with the Rimrigger, because I don't want to waste too many resources. So one option you could go for would be to mirror this on the other side, where you build 2 phantom walls right on these 2 tiles, and you remove this. And instead, you just use a random, even if it's a T1 urban barrier, and you place it either there or there, depending on whether you want to force the enemies to go up or down. Why would it be interesting? Because let's say you're facing a raid with ranged enemies. If you only have gas jet throwers set up on one side of the map, you can decide to say, well, I'm going to block the top path, I'm going to force all the enemies to go down, and that way I can just rely on invisible ops to push the entire raid. And that way I don't have to worry about it, I don't have to rebuild my gas jet thrower. So instead of spending resources for 3 gas jet throwers, you spend resources for just 1 basic wall. Even a T1 urban barrier is enough. That is an option, you don't have to do this. You also have some alternatives, which is to still stall raid with openers and do Blaze U somewhere around here, with Blaze right here with Camo Food, and then U somewhere around there. Then you throw the boss. You can just stall this. When you see that most enemies have come, you can just let them walk. You just keep camouflage or gadget throwers, and you throw them all into the pit, and that's it. Make sure as much as possible to have options when it comes to slowing down your enemies. One of the best operators for this kind of job is definitely Manticore. You can also add, if you really want a lot of slowdown, add Manticore and also Ines Sentinel. So you just bring Ines on skill 1, because you make her generate a bunch of DP, and then you drop her here, you hit her, and then you place a Manticore on top. And all the enemies on these tiles will be slowed down by so much that most of them will then be thrown into the wall. Gathering of Feathers. Gathering of Feathers is very annoying because you have these kind of bushes everywhere. And these kind of bushes everywhere, as mentioned before, will delete any wall you place on them. Now, from my experience, once this map has been loaded for a player, I think, I'm not entirely certain, but that's something to verify, I think that the bushes will stick in place. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I do not remember seeing any bush at the bottom for me in many different days. So I still have a bush here that I can't destroy. That one is for sure. I don't have a bush here. And in fact, that's usually where I have like my Vanguard set up. So when I open up this map, if I'm opening with agents, I place the Hunting Net Launcher here and usually have a Puzzle there and Chill Check if need be, but Puzzle is usually enough. And that gets my DP generation going. Otherwise, I just have 3 slots for the Vanguards and just collect a deck. It's convenient enough. Another really weird thing about this map is that for some reason, it's one of the only maps that naturally starts you with more DP than the other ones. Usually you start with 0 DP, but this one, I think you start with like 10 DP by default. So you can right away like place a puzzle plus Hunting Net Launcher, and you don't even have to bring an operation kit or anything. When it comes to stalling, enemies have to come to the right side, and they have to go up, and then they get into the blue box. Let's talk about the shape of the walls here, because there are a few things going. First off, this tile is important. This is going to be your Unictus tile. And the important point about this is that it effectively means that your Unictus is invincible. All you need to do is have a healer with camouflage right here facing down, and your Unictus will never die to anything. You don't have to worry about global range, because all your operators have camouflage or are on a camouflage tile. You don't have to worry about explosions. You don't have to worry about damage reflect, because you will always hit only one enemy. So a medic with camouflage plus unique test plus 2 SP batteries, and you'll be able to pull all the enemies on all this entire path. And the edge of unique test style is about the start of the blue box. So it takes quite a bit of time for all the enemies to go all the way back. And the interesting aspect with it is that you can also do the same when it comes to this and this style. Now, this style is not the most convenient, but if you want to place like Ascalon or Umeri or Manticore right here, you can do it. It will actually work, and the same thing, it will slow down the enemies enough that you can stall even more raids. With this, you have the means to eliminate absolutely every single raid in the game. There's absolutely nothing that the enemy can throw at you. The only thing that could kill you at this point is a crash. Because even if they are fast enemies, you technically still have a way to counter it. If that is not enough for you, there are more interesting quirks to this. So the reason why this setup is kind of weird is because I want to save this spot in case I want to place, for example, a Wheelie. If I'm dealing with the Rainbringer, for example, it's not a very convenient map for the Rainbringer. You can technically stall with all pianos, but you won't really have room for like Tragodia to do a comfy stall. You can like bring a Chubai, but also, yeah, it's going to be very weird. So if I'm facing the Rainbreaker, usually I just go for using the stall, even if it's a lot longer than usual, simply because it's the safest option. But in that case, I usually have a Weedy right here, facing right, simply to keep pushing the spiders over and over again. It's not just for the Rainbreaker, it can also work for some other raids. And also it saves this style right here if need be, because the problem with Tragodia is that if you place Tragodia right here, enemies can still go through this style in particular, meaning they will draw attacks from Tragodia. So instead, I have this one set up to make sure that no enemy will ever go there apart from the boss, who will be stalled in this position. Other than that, if you want to do a stall with openers and there are a lot of range enemies, keep in mind that it has a very long forward range, so I can just place openers right here, facing right side, with a hunting net launcher either there or right there. In this case, I'm going to place an ambusher in this position as well. And that's basically it. You also have to consider that with all the camouflage tiles, you have all the room to place a U. And one last point I want to mention, because you can actually mess this up. If you are using Vanilla Wing, it's important to note that the Vanilla Wing kind of converts the tile by giving attack speed to your operators. What I mean by this is that because the Vanilla Wing gives 40 attack speed to your operators, when it goes over the tiles, so if you have a Vanilla Wing going like this and you place an operators there, they should be getting the 40 attack speed. But they are not, because they are on a grass tile, and the grass tile effect is going to override the attack speed buff from the Vanilla Wing. So if you want to stall with Chubai, for example, using the Vanilla Wing attack speed buff, keep in mind that she can't be on one of those. It's an annoying quirk, but you have to be aware of this. Which means it's also not going to work for anything else. So if you want to burst down the boss with a QB, make sure that her tile is not a grass tile if you want to pre-buff with a Vanilla Wing. Primordial Surge. The first comment says it all. This map sucks. So my comment about the bushes destroying your walls comes in full force, because this fall right here will basically prevent you from doing any kind of setup which redirects the enemies. So you're basically stuck making a wall on these few tiles right there, and that's about it. Frankly, I have two walls there, but it's... you could remove them, it wouldn't change anything. You could place technically a Phantomic Barrier there, but I'd rather the enemies go in a straight line, so I can place like a Woody right there facing left. because that way they won't be stuck inside on this wall specifically. It's just not a very good map. The only saving grace is that you shouldn't have to deal with any boss here apart from the Rainbringer, but you only have to deal with the Rainbringer there if you messed up earlier. You could still make use of this one tile because it's a camouflage ground tile that, well, it's grass. It's going to give invisibility to your Nectus, so you can pull the Rainbringer back from there. You probably want to put a wall there to stall the enemies even further, but I want to insist, it's a terrible idea. You should not do this. You should not bother. If you do, if really I had to, because I had no other option, that's what I would do. I would have Nectus right here. I would have Phantomic Barrier right there. I would have Weedy with Camouflage on scale 2 right here facing up, because that way she's going to constantly push all the spiders that actually go through. Might even had a gas jet thrower on this tile in particular. But the point is, and also you will need probably move this Phantomic Barrier, these two actually to the right, and give 2 or 3 SP batteries to your Nectus. That way she will be able to constantly pull the enemies over and over and over again. And then, beyond all this, you still need to find a room for somewhere to kill the enemies. Luckily, there is a time. Luckily, I don't have to even consider the option because I can kill the Rainbringer pretty reliably on one spot. But you know, just keeping options in mind. Drinkwater Aspect is actually a pretty interesting layout, but it comes with a few issues. I am not entirely sure, actually, when it comes to the layout, regarding these walls, because I suspect that the enemies might still be able to go through somehow. The dangerous part about it is that there are a lot of checkpoints for the enemies in this area, just like the normal raid. The approach that I have is not to use the pits, not too often. It's just not convenient, and I don't even bother using platforms. Mostly because I don't like the aspect that you have to constantly add them to your tools. It's very easy to forget. So if your strategy relies solely on these platforms, you're gonna get yourself in trouble. Instead, the approach is to have Ulpianus sitting here, facing right, with Tilopsis, usually around there, facing up, buffing Ulpianus and allowing him to stun, with an anti-net launcher right there. Blaze Altar will be sitting here, facing right, with you somewhere along there to provide the firewall, to burn everything. And the boss, because it's always about the Rainbringer is the only one who will go through there, will be stalled between these two tiles. The danger here is that there's not that big of a distance between the raid and the boss, and because Tragodia will be sitting right on this natural high ground tile, that means you need to make sure that the enemies never get past this line. So it is pretty tight on Ulpianus. You need to make sure that you got 1% uptime and probably a bit of leeway, otherwise you can just break the stall very easily. If you break the stall, you can actually manage to stall again, but it's going to be a lot of trouble. Because it usually means you're going to have to break one of these walls, pull the enemies back in. If you're using Ulpianus, there's a good chance they might die. It takes a bit of getting used to. If you attempt this particular setup, it's going to be very risky at the start. Just saying it straight away, you're probably going to fail a few ones. Beyond this, because we still need to deal with spiders, I have a setup here with a gas jet thrower, a range tile, with a wizard LS1, as is usual. This time, however, the spiders will never be thrown behind this wall, because it's a bit too far, they will get pretty far through it, but they will not go over the wall. So any spiders that gets through there will be eliminated just by Wisdale and gas jet thrower. If you still want to make use out of the pits, you can do it to some extent if you want to make use of the platforms, because all the enemies will still go through the water and then down. So you can perfectly put a Gladia right here. You can decide to put a platform with an Ascalon or Manticore or whatever. You still have your options right there. Lost orders. I have a video available, and you can actually see the link right there along with the timestamp. So you check at 1:48. It shows the setup in action. The entire point of the setup is to abuse checkpoints as much as possible. And it becomes absolute insanity. Now, not all the raids will have the same checkpoints. As per the normal version, there are some variations. Some raids will have enemies trying to go around this, and some will basically just ignore it and try to go straight for the blue box. So some enemies have just a checkpoint right on this tile, and then they go to the blue box. Usually it's some from the top. So you'll see some enemies just skipping through this wall and then going to the blue box. Pretty annoying, but we're gonna deal with it. But the one raid it's meant to counter is not the Celebrator, even though the Celebrator does go through here. If you are dealing with a Celebrator, my suggestion, because it's the simplest, is to have Unectes there, along with an SP battery, and just pause a raid and have something with full camouflage, like Ascalon, Umiri, and Sakiko, for example. And once you've done this, bait the boss, bait one attack, and have Tragodia. Just put Tragodia and make sure that the boss is sitting somewhere. And once the boss is damaged enough, you can just push the boss into the hole with Widdy plus some weightless, and you'll be fine. Araphic also goes through this raid, and the enemies will skip through this tile. If that's the case, I have an Enforcer here facing up. It's important to have Enforcer because it has the advantage that it does not take any damage reflect. You have an Olayak here facing left, because you do want your constant weightless. I have Widdy right somewhere on these two tiles. She can be there. And then I have like usually an AR Archer because I want to bring some inning to everyone. And finally, for safety, I usually have Unectes there yet again. Unectes, this is basically Unectes spot. It's going to work all the time, except because of the Rainbringer, which is the last raid we're going to talk about. The Rainbringer is the most interesting one, because the raid actually attempts to go around this central island. Meaning, the enemies will have some very weird behavior, whereas they will try to do something along the lines of this. Well, they go there, and then they go all the way back here, and then they will go there, and go through this tile, and then they try to sometimes go all the way around again, and then they will go to the blue box. What this means is a bit absurd. But if you have Widdy right on this spot, she's fully safe, because even though the enemies sometimes even go through the walls, this spot is entirely safe. When you face a Rainbringer raid, your big priority is generating a ton of DP, because a raid starts very, very fast. You have a Widdy right there. I usually have an Angelina at the ready with SP cost down foot. You don't need the SP cost down foot, but it is an interesting safety, especially if there is a thunderstorm going on, because you don't have much room on this map. Usually, I'm starting with agents, because agents can really produce a ton of DP very, very fast. So I'm going to have a Hunting Knight launcher somewhere in this vicinity, with the agents hitting it and generating the DP. You have to consider that the fireballs will be going all the way up to here, which is very risky. You also have all these tiles are threatened because of all the ranged enemies. Unectes will still be sitting in this position and pulling the raid. I can alternate between two ambushes right here, so usually Manticore and either Ethan or Ascalon, to slow down the enemies and buy a bit of time.
because sometimes they still make a bit of progress, and I don't want this to happen. I want them to be slowed down enough for United Scale to come back in time. And I just have Witty. When the boss actually comes, my suggestion is do not even try to block the boss with a Spectre Altar. That is what I used to do. I've stopped doing this because it resulted in sometimes, in some cases, where the boss would be shifted to the right side because I happened to drop Spectre Altar right on top of the boss, and just due to some very minor rounding issues, the boss ends up basically on this position, which is exactly what I don't want. So instead, just use Kafka to silence everything around the boss, and use Witty with the cannon. With Witty in this position, cannon right there, and you fire both at the same time. You need to have weightless. So usually I'll drop a range tab with Angelina right in this position. With the SP cost down foot, you will be able to use her skill instantly. With this, the boss is dead. There will usually be a few spiders left, which can kill Unictus, but as mentioned, the enemies have a very long path around. So you have enough time to actually kill the few spiders that remain, and by the time Interest comes back, you still have enough life points. You have time to drop her again and pull the enemy and pull the enemies again, and you'll be safe. You have a few variants. You have some lineups and some layouts that are more streamlined, but because my priority is really to protect Witty, because she's the one who can push enemies in there, this is why I have all these walls. I absolutely do not want enemies to be able to go through her time. If you do not want to use Witty, or maybe if she dies, you can also use Effeter, preferably with Camouflage Food if you're dealing with a bunch of ranged enemies, because Effeter also has a range to push enemies that are on this tile, although she will not work for the boss, but she will work for everything else. The best way to learn how this map functions, again, don't hesitate to check the link to the video at the timestamp indicated. Even if it was recorded before Unictus, the general idea remained the same. Skirmish is very straightforward because none of the enemies will spawn at the top, they all go through the bottom. You have, this is just an unenclosed tile, so enemies will not be able to enter this tile. They can enter the two tiles to the left and the right of it. The big threat here is a Rainbreaker, because a Rainbreaker is the only boss that can go through there. The general approach is, especially if it starts with a Thunderstorm, you have a Hunting Net Launcher here, you have Puzzle there, generating DP, and then the Fail Beast there to break the lightning. I'm gonna have Openness and this spot facing down and stunning the enemies. Is going to be, if I'm correct, just so I don't mess things up, I think it is in this spot. I think it's this spot facing down, and I have a Hunting Net Launcher right there to guarantee that he just keeps stunning the enemies. I'm gonna have a Theopsis here facing right, I have a Wizardal here facing up, and a Gas Jet Thrower facing up, because we're dealing with the spiders. The Ringbringer and the spiders always come down to this blue box. They don't go there, they don't try to reach this blue box, they try to reach this one. Which is very convenient for us because it means that we just have to put all the enemies on this straight line and not have to worry about some of them going diagonally. All the enemies there will be killed at the bottom. We can have a Blaze Altar right there facing down. We can have you here facing down, so that the walls is on this line precisely. And the Rainbreaker can bestow anywhere in this area with a Tragodia, the classic. Once I've confirmed that the Rainbreaker is stalled, this wall by the way is broken. You can just place Skillby and Ifrit and start damaging the boss, and the same thing as one of the previous maps, I can both deal with the raid and the boss at the same time. The constructs are all at the top, and the sole reason they are here is for the buffs, because you get a buff when it comes to slowing down the enemies, and your operators also get a little bit of extra attack. Funnily enough, in my run, I have not destroyed this wall, and I think I can't destroy it anymore. But it doesn't really matter. You should break this wall whenever you can, and just place some of these somewhere in order to get the passive boss, because it's just the easiest thing to do. You can even put them somewhere near the bottom. Although I think there might be a mistake on this map. I think these actually, I don't think you can deploy on these. Might fix the map later. I'll double check. Apart from this, you're gonna have some raids going through. The most important other raid is one with the global range boss. It's just a single archer. If you're facing him and you don't want to bother too much, you can just bring Mitum, because Mitum summons will be able to bait all the attacks without issues. Otherwise, you can stick to the good old having all your operators using camouflage. That also works. But because I don't want to repair the gas jet thrower all the time, and because it doesn't cost me anything really to bring Mitum, that's the option I tend to go for instead. Warrior's Vision. This map is very annoying, even though there is no boss raid, apart from the Rusthammer Warrior. Like, the Rusthammer Warrior with a global range archer is the only boss that can spawn there, but it's not the actual boss raid. The issue with this layout is that you basically have to deal with dual lanes either way. Openers doesn't have any convenient spot to actually stun things, so your best bet is usually to have unit tests combined with a bunch of ambushes and an absolute ton of DP generation somewhere in the middle. The danger here is that this particular boss, the Rusthammer Warrior, is invincible for a period of time, on top of being unblockable. And if you don't bait some of the shots, there is a decent chance that it might be capable of reaching your blue box. There should be a blue box right here. Please pretend there is one. And so you want to prevent the enemies from reaching this particular spot. This is going to be your priority, is because some of the enemies would go straight like this. You have no other choice but to have an ambushers slowing them down here and preventing them from moving. The issue is this raid comes with the boss, which is ranged, meaning you will also be lacking options when it comes to actually deploying a bunch of operators, unless these already have camouflage. You don't have that much room if you want to place a Mitum, although I guess technically you could place his summon at the top, but there are still some risks that remain. So this is not the best map for this. That being said, because it's literally next to the skirmish map, which is a lot more convenient, you can very much decide to just ignore this map entirely and wait until the raid reaches skirmish and then intercept on skirmish instead, which might be the most convenient option for most people. Windswept Ravine. I don't like this map. I don't think anyone does. The setup is very, very, very basic. Why do you put this one tower here to reveal the entire map? It does have a tendency to get broken at times, usually because I have some vanguards somewhere and I forget about some ranged AoEs that happen to hit one of my operators. Either way, it's a terrible map. The best recommendation I would have for this one is just stick to melee-only raids, or raids that are particularly slow, so they can deal with them. In some cases, you could be dealing with a Shan'ai raid. If you face the Advanced Shan'ai raid, which has 3 enemies, it has the Secret Keepers, the Guardians, and the Rocket Launchers. If you want to get your DP generation going, you need to do it extremely fast. My recommendation then will be to bring an Operation Kit, Puzzle, Shield Chuck, an Anti-Gnat Launcher, and then some camouflage tools, because you can still give invisibility to your agents to allow them to produce DP safely for a longer period of time. For the rest of the stall, the easy bet is just to rely on unit tests, plus a bunch of ambushers, and just pulling the enemies back and forth until they all die while being slowed down and just dying from either Ascalon or Umori plus Akiko. You'll need quite a few SP batteries on your Nectars, especially if some of the enemies come from the top, because even if they are slowed down, Unitas usually be in this position, somewhere around here, one of these two tiles, which is just about out of range. The range is going to stop somewhere near the blue box, which means you will need full visibility. So if your tower is destroyed for any reason, which probably, let's be honest, will happen quite a few times, she can end up just not being able to pull enemies just because you're lacking the visibility. Either way, terrible freaking map. I did try to install Graphic on it, and because of the particular quirks of how Unitas pulls enemies, where they are not going to be centered on her tile. So let's say we have Unitas on this tile right there. She's in the middle. The problem is that when she pulls enemies, the enemies will not go to the center of the tile, they might go here, or there, or there, or there. The problem with this is if you have an enemy that decides to go to the top, very top of the tile, and then go to the blue box, they can end up clipping with the range tiles right here if you deploy any, or any kind of operators. So that's a risk with your Nectars on this map in particular. The same is true for this one. Basically, the closer you are to your Nectars, the more likely it is that an enemy will clip through some of the tiles. So this one is a complete no-go. This one is mostly a no-go. And these two are at risks. These two are relatively safe, unless there are some enemies going from there, because obviously if they go to Unitas, they will take this path, which means this tile is basically the only one which is truly safe. So keep that in mind if you ever want to rely on Unitas to pull enemies on this particular map. Apart from that, if you are dealing with a Accelerator, avoid this map. You cannot comfortably have the Accelerator be on the edge of Tragedia's range on this map. As such, just avoid it. It's possible, technically, but you would still need to find a way to deal with most of the raids. If there is only the Accelerators, then it's possible. The other issue is, this is a very small map. In case of Thunderstorm, most of the tools would just not work. You can't really put a Fail Beast, because a Fail Beast has no safe spot to be if there's any ranged enemy. You can't really use Omni Umbrella, because everything is going to be targetable. There's no natural range tiles. You can't really use the Remote Shield, because they also don't have enough room to be used. One possible way, if you really want to use Omni Umbrella on this map, while only having Camouflaged Operator and no range tile, will bring someone like Roberta, because Roberta, for example, is a supporter while being melee, and she will still be able to provide the Omni Umbrella to surrounding ops. That being said, I still wouldn't recommend it, especially considering the next map is one that allows you to just throw the enemies down the hole. So you should only focus on Windswept Ravine if you have a very, very easy clear. So if you have just melee enemies, you can have like Theopsis, Ulpianus, and just stun the enemies in this vicinity, and then you're going to be fine. But the moment the ranged enemies show up, or damage reflect enemies show up, just wait until the next node. It's just so much easier. Field of Gravel. Just like the beginner version, enemies have a ton of checkpoints. I've worked around a lot of them. The only safe spot that I've seen really is to put like phantomic barriers like these. Most raids will have enemies going in one of these 4 tiles, and then somewhere in this vicinity. so no ground tile can be considered truly safe. But at the very least, they will not go through these two walls. Some will sometimes, some raids will have some enemies going through one of these walls. Luckily, these are less of a priority, and the reason these walls are still here is to force the enemies to waste a bit of time and also straighten them out so that they are on this line specifically, which makes it more convenient to push them. If the Ringbringer shows up on this map, forget about it. However, you might be facing someone like the Dustweaver, for example, in which case you have a prime spot to place a Glockus right there with a bunch of SP batteries and some slowdowns, and you have no problem just getting rid of them. The other raids should not be an issue either, so it's mostly about if you deal with a Ringbringer, just find another spot. Just focus on other raids while the Ringbringer passes this map. It's simply the easier solution. Rogue Trail, there is basically nothing to be said about this because the only reason you get in there is if you fail to intercept the Ringbringer. If you do fail to intercept the Ringbringer on the text with a choice map, which is a fortress map, this is where the Ringbringer will go. There is not much to be said. You do have to consider that the fireballs recover most of the area. If you place openers right here on this post, facing left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tiles, it will be able to stun enemies up to there. You can decide to place a phantomic barrier right here if you want to rely on openers. I have not personally done this because I don't deal with a Ringbringer on this tile. If I fail to intercept the Ringbringer on text with a choice, I will usually deal with another set of raid and intercept the Ringbringer on another node, not this one. But it's just, if you want more options, this is what I personally go through to have a phantomic barrier right there. An invited guest. So this is a very, very big map. And it's probably easier if we just go through all the maps, well, all the paths that the enemies have to take. So the red boxes are on the very right side. There's one incursion point there and one right here. You have a secret area here with the 2 secret walls that have been destroyed. And the path has been broken, so enemies can go through there, meaning if you had an enemy that spawns from here, they would have to go all the way around, like this, and then down, and up here, and then straight to the blue box. You have several spots that are viable for Unictus, so you can decide to have Unictus sitting right here, or I tend to pick the slightly more convenient path because I do want to make use out of those styles. If I want to have like operators next to each other, I tend to put her right there along with some ambushes. If things go poorly because you're realizing that you mistimed openers or anything, you can place a wall right here and also delete that one, because then the only way the enemies have to get to the blue box is to go all the way back like this, then down, up in this S shape, and then they'll get through this, which buys you a ton of time. The shortest path at this point for an enemy that is traveling will be there, where they still have to go up and then go down. So it buys you quite a bit of time either way. Ideally, you should not have to use all this part of the layout, but it is an emergency. Considering I did screw things over once, I decided to build this part of the map as a safety measure. Just better safe than sorry. Like yes, you do have a bit of an investment, but if it saves you an act, it's absolutely worth it. And with this, we are done just going over the different layouts. This part is only of interest if you want to create the same kind of layout that are present in the other maps. So if you want to share layouts like this, this is what we're going to go over. First off, we need to use this particular link. So it's not going to look exactly like this. You'll probably have some tiles already available. What we are going to do is open the editor. You will need a few things. The first thing you're going to need is a sprite sheet. When you open the sprite sheet, it will be a file like this. You click on download, and you're going to have your sprite sheet available somewhere in your download folder. You go back here, and then you pick the map that you want to edit. So let's say you want to create a map for Jagged Jungle. You click on the link, and it's going to be a JSON file like this. You also click on download, and you should have your own file. Then, in the editor itself, you want to import both the map as well as a sprite sheet. So when it comes to importing sprite sheets, you can actually edit the existing one. So you can have a set of tile sets of a bunch of tile sets available here. You're gonna have this pen right here, and you will choose an image. So you pick the area sprites. So in that case, I already downloaded one, but I'm gonna pick this one. It should look something not quite like this, because you need to set the tile width and the tile height to 70 and the spacing to 3 pixels. This is a pixel count. Once you've done this, don't forget to give it a name. It's not necessary, but it's a nice bonus. You save the tile set, and now you have a map which uses the array tile set. Now, you probably don't want to recreate all the Reclamation Algorithm maps, so the answer is to import from the file that we just downloaded. So Jagged Jungle was a file that we got. It says td hub. I double click, and there we have it. I have this which is available. Some of the tiles, so there is a bit of a difference for the people who are not used to this particular editor. There are ground objects and just straight up objects. So the ground, if I just make the ground invisible, you can see what is considered just a straight up object. So all these are considered objects. If you want to remove them, the easiest way to go about it is to go click on object and then erase. If you want to make a particular setup, you can just remove all the wood, for example. I would not recommend removing the bushes for all the maps, just some of them. I can also remove this particular tile because the secret wall, you're probably going to break it. And then, if you want to add some walls, you can just click on some of the walls on this side. Don't forget to activate paint. And then you can decide to place some walls right here. Maybe you want to block enemies there. Maybe you want to force them all the way around. And you can do a setup like this. If you're not liking some of what you're doing, you can just erase and you're going to be good. You can also click on one of the empty tiles. So if I want to remove these, I can just paint with an empty tile. So if I do this, I can paint with an empty tile and it's going to look just fine. Don't forget you can just undo what you've done if you ever dislike what's been going on, but sometimes it doesn't fully work. So the editor does have its limits. It still has the advantage that, yeah, you can still place things pretty comfortably. So if I recreate one of the setups I have, it's going to look something like this, for example. And there we have it. And after this, you have all the opportunity you will want to do a screenshot. You also have the opportunity to export as a JSON file, in which case the people who import it will still need to download the spreadsheet. So the easier way to deal with it is just to make a screenshot and just share it to people. If you have any further question regarding the editor, besides trying to do more tests yourself, you can also just put some comments and ask your questions in the comments of this here video. I will try to answer them relatively quickly. To end this video, I would like to thank you. If you've taken the time to check my work, if you use it, if you share some layouts, again, thank you very much for the attention. For people who are also interested, I will be live streaming the days 1950 to 2000 of RACC this very weekend this video is released. If you're too late, don't worry, the VODs will be available right here on YouTube. On Twitch, they will probably be expiring. I will be streaming on both YouTube and Twitch, or at least I will try to, if the technical aspects do not fail me. Hopefully I will see you there, or if not, I will see you in another video. See you around, Doctor.